The Chugach Mountains stretched endlessly before Chen, their snow-capped peaks piercing a steel-grey sky that promised another brutal storm. 48 days. That's all she needed to prove to herself that she could still survive anywhere, do anything, just like she did during her classified years with the military's Arctic Reconnaissance Unit. Maya adjusted her pack straps and checked her GPS coordinates one final time before the device disappeared into her jacket's inner pocket. The familiar weight of survival gear pressed against her shoulders, a comforting reminder of countless missions where preparation meant the difference between extraction and extraction in a body bag. She'd requested this assignment from herself, a solo expedition into Alaska's most remote wilderness, because after 18 months behind a desk analyzing satellite imagery for the Pentagon, she needed to remember who she was. The wind carried the metallic scent of approaching snow as she began her descent toward the valley floor. Her breath formed crystalline clouds that dissipated quickly in the frigid air. Each step crunched through the surface crust, her snowshoes distributing her weight across the unstable terrain. This was meditation in motion, the careful calculation of every footfall, the constant assessment of weather patterns, the methodical rationing of energy that would carry her through the next 6 weeks. Maya had chosen this particular route specifically because it appeared on no tourist maps and offered no cell tower coverage for hundreds of miles. The solitude was exactly what she craved. No briefings, no classified reports, no late-night calls from commanders who'd forgotten that even. Black Ops specialists needed sleep. Just her, the mountain, and the kind of silence that forced a person to confront their own thoughts. She established her first camp in a natural windbreak formed by fallen timber, following protocols drilled into her during Arctic warfare training. Shelter first, then water, then food. Priorities that had kept her alive from Afghanistan's Hindu Kush to Siberia's frozen wasteland. The military-grade tent went up efficiently despite the dropping temperature, its thermal lining designed to maintain livable conditions in weather that could kill an unprepared person within hours. As she worked, Maya's mind wandered to the conversation that had ultimately driven her into these mountains. Her commanding officer's words still echoed, "You're too valuable to risk in the field anymore, Chen. Your analytical skills are needed here." The implication was clear. Her days as an operational asset were over. At 34, she'd been relegated to a support role, her years of specialized training reduced to examining reconnaissance photos from the safety of a climate-controlled office. The first night passed without incident, her body falling easily back into the rhythms of wilderness survival. She woke before dawn, as programmed by years of military discipline, and assessed the situation. The storm had materialized as predicted, dumping 6 inches of fresh powder that would slow her progress, but posed no immediate threat. Maya broke camp methodically, leaving no trace of her presence, another deeply ingrained habit from operations where discovery meant mission failure. Days 3 through 7 blurred together in the comfortable routine of travel, navigation, and camp establishment. The weather held relatively stable, with temperatures hovering around 15 below, manageable conditions that allowed steady progress deeper into the mountain range. Maya found herself relaxing for the first time in months, her body remembering the satisfaction of self-reliance that no amount of office work could provide. On day 8, she encountered the first sign that she wasn't entirely alone in this wilderness. Wolf tracks crossed her path, the prints fresh enough to suggest the pack had passed through sometime during the previous night. Maya examined them carefully, noting the size and spacing that indicated at least 4 adult animals. She adjusted her route slightly, not from fear, but from professional respect for apex predators in their native environment. The wolves' presence actually reassured her. It meant the ecosystem was functioning normally, supporting the kind of wildlife that required vast territories and abundant prey. She'd operated in regions where the absence of natural predators indicated environmental contamination or human interference that posed greater dangers than any 4-legged threat. Day 11 brought the heaviest snowfall yet, forcing Maya to establish an unplanned shelter and wait out conditions that reduced visibility to mere yards. She used the downtime for equipment maintenance and route planning, spreading topographical maps across her sleeping bag while wind howled against the tent's outer shell. According to her calculations, she was now approximately 40 miles from the nearest maintained trail, deep in territory that saw perhaps 1 or 2 visitors annually. The storm cleared during the night, leaving behind a landscape transformed by fresh accumulation. Maya emerged from her shelter to brilliant sunshine reflecting off pristine snow, the kind of morning that made every hardship worthwhile. She felt strong, confident, completely in her element as she prepared to continue deeper into the range. She had no way of knowing that within 24 hours, everything she understood about survival, about the world itself, would be turned upside down by a discovery that would challenge not just her skills, but her sanity. The metal was wrong. That was Maya's first coherent thought as she crouched beside the twisted wreckage, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. She'd seen enough downed aircraft in her 20 years of wilderness rescue work to recognize the standard materials: aluminum, steel, composite plastics. This was something else entirely. The surface beneath her gloved fingers felt impossibly smooth despite the violent impact, almost warm to the touch even in the sub-zero temperature. No oxidation, no ice buildup where there should have been frost. The color shifted subtly as she moved, like oil on water, revealing depths that seemed to extend beyond what should have been possible in solid metal. Maya pulled out her satellite phone, checking for signal. Nothing. Not unusual this deep in the backcountry, but the timing felt ominous. She photographed the wreckage from multiple angles, the camera's flash illuminating strange geometric patterns etched into the hull, not rivets or welds, something organic, almost like scales or neural pathways. The crash site told a story that made no sense. The object had come down hard, carving a 100-meter gouge through the permafrost, but there was no debris field, no scattered components, no fuel stains, no fire damage. Just this single, intact piece of impossibly advanced technology sitting in a crater that was already beginning to fill with wind-blown snow. She circled the wreckage slowly, her mountaineering boots crunching on the frozen ground. Roughly cylindrical, maybe 8 meters long and 3 wide, with one end crumpled from impact. The other end appeared to have been torn away, revealing an interior that her flashlight beam couldn't fully penetrate. The darkness inside seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Maya had always prided herself on rational thinking. 34 years of life had taught her that the wilderness held enough real dangers without inventing supernatural ones. But standing here, 200 kilometers from the nearest settlement, she felt something she rarely experienced: genuine unease. The wind picked up, driving ice crystals against her face mask. According to her GPS, she was still 12 hours from her planned campsite. Common sense dictated she should document what she could and continue on schedule. The object wasn't going anywhere, and she could report it to authorities when she reached civilization. But as she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A section of the hull near the intact end was different, darker, with what looked like a seam running vertically for about 2 meters. Not a crack from the impact. This was intentional. A door, maybe, or an access panel. Maya approached cautiously, one hand instinctively moving to the bear spray on her belt. The seam was definitely artificial, barely a millimeter wide but perfectly straight. She traced it with her finger, noting how the metal seemed to respond to her touch, growing slightly warmer. A soft click echoed from inside the wreckage. She froze, every survival instinct screaming warnings. The sound had been mechanical, deliberate, like a lock disengaging or a system activating. Maya backed away slowly, her eyes never leaving the seam. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then the section of hull began to move. A new sound emerged from the opening, not mechanical this time, but almost organic. A rhythmic pulsing, like a heartbeat or breathing. Slow and steady, definitely artificial, but somehow alive. Maya realized she was holding her breath. She forced herself to exhale, the warm air fogging her face mask. Every protocol she'd ever learned about wilderness safety said to retreat. to get distance between herself and the unknown. But something else held her in place, a growing certainty that whatever this was, it was important. Potentially the most important discovery in human history. She pulled out her camera again, taking video of the open hull and the strange interior. The footage might not capture everything her eyes were seeing, but it would provide some record of what she'd found. The pulsing sound grew slightly louder, and for a moment Maya could have sworn she heard something else underneath it. A whisper, almost below the threshold of hearing, in no language she recognized. She made her decision. Documentation first, then investigation. If she was going to do this, she would do it properly. Maya began setting up her portable camp 50 meters from the wreckage, keeping the opened hull in sight while she worked. The metallic hum grew stronger as Maya approached, vibrating through her bones like a tuning fork pressed against her sternum. The object ahead defied every rational explanation her mind scrambled to construct. It wasn't a plane, no wings, no tail section, no recognizable aviation markings. The hull curved seamlessly, almost organic in its contours, as if it had been grown rather than built. Maya circled the perimeter, her trained eye cataloguing details. No visible seams, no rivets or welding marks. The surface appeared molten and then frozen mid-flow, like obsidian shaped by impossible heat. A breach in the forward section gaped open, edges curled outward as if something had punched through from the inside. The sound wasn't coming from the craft itself, she realized. It emanated from beneath it, where the object had carved a steaming crater into the permafrost. The ice around the impact site had melted and refrozen in strange crystalline patterns that caught what little sunlight penetrated the overcast sky. Maya's satellite communicator crackled with static. She pulled it from her pack, checking the display. No signal. That was impossible. She'd had 4 bars just an hour ago. The device showed active satellite locks, but every attempt to transmit failed with an error message she'd never seen before. Interference detected. A new sound joined the persistent humming, a rhythmic clicking like Geiger countermeasurements. But Maya carried no radiation detector, and the click seemed to echo from multiple directions simultaneously. She spun slowly, scanning the white expanse, seeing nothing but endless snow and the dark line of spruce trees in the distance. The clicking stopped. In the sudden silence, Maya became acutely aware of her isolation. The nearest human settlement lay over 100 miles south. Her planned extraction point was still 3 days away on foot. Whatever had happened here, whatever this thing was, she stood alone with it in one of Earth's most unforgiving environments. Movement flickered in her peripheral vision. Maya whipped around, rifle raised, but found only swaying evergreen branches. The wind had picked up, carrying an odd scent, metallic and sharp, like copper pennies left in the rain. It made her sinuses burn and her eyes water. Against every survival instinct screaming warnings in her head, Maya approached the breach in the craft's hull. The opening yawned roughly 6 feet high, its edges smooth as melted glass. Beyond the threshold lay impenetrable darkness that her flashlight beam seemed reluctant to penetrate. The interior revealed itself in fragments as her light swept across unfamiliar surfaces, curved walls without right angles, surfaces that might have been control panels marked with symbols that resembled no human writing system. Everything appeared sized for human proportions, yet fundamentally alien in design philosophy. Maya's light found something that made her stomach clench. Dark stains spattered across what might have been a pilot's area. The substance had a consistency too thick for blood, too dark for hydraulic fluid. It clung to surfaces in ways that defied gravity, trailing upward along walls in impossible patterns. A metallic scrape echoed from deeper within the craft. Maya backed away from the opening, weapon ready, heart hammering against her ribs. The sound repeated, deliberate, measured, like footsteps on an unfamiliar surface. Something was moving inside the wreckage. Hello? The word escaped before she could stop it. her voice swallowed immediately by the vast silence. No response came, but the movement sounds ceased as if whatever lurked within was now listening. Maya retreated to a position behind a wind-carved snowdrift 20 yards from the craft, establishing a defensive position with clear sight lines. Her survival training warred with scientific curiosity and primal fear. Every protocol demanded she document the discovery, attempt contact with authorities, establish the nature of the threat. But her equipment failures suggested something was actively interfering with her communications. The humming intensified, rising in pitch until it became almost painful. Ice crystals began forming in the air around the crash site, swirling in patterns that defied the wind direction. The temperature was dropping rapidly. Maya's breath grew thicker, her exposed skin stinging with increasing cold. Then she saw them, tracks in the snow leading away from the wreckage. Not quite human footprints, but close enough to make her blood freeze. They were larger than her own feet, with too many toe marks, and they showed a gait pattern that was disturbingly familiar, yet fundamentally wrong. The tracks led northeast, toward the deep wilderness where no rescue would ever find her. Maya faced an impossible choice: follow the trail of whatever had survived the crash, or flee toward extraction while potentially condemning the world to ignorance of this discovery. The clicking sounds resumed, now coming from the direction of the tracks. The cold bit through Maya's thermal layers as she crouched beside the twisted metal, her breath forming crystalline clouds in the -40 air. What she'd initially taken for aircraft debris defied every assumption she'd made about the crash site. The metal itself seemed wrong, too smooth, almost organic in its curves, with a surface that appeared to shift slightly when she wasn't looking directly at it. She pulled off one glove and touched the material with a bare fingertip. Instead of the expected bite of frozen metal, she felt only a neutral temperature, as if the object existed in some thermal equilibrium that ignored the brutal Alaskan cold. Her scientific mind raced through possibilities while her survival instincts screamed warnings. Maya withdrew her hand and photographed the debris from multiple angles, though she doubted the images would capture what her eyes were seeing. The metal's surface held an iridescent quality that reminded her of oil on water, shifting between deep purples and silvery greens. No aircraft manufacturer on Earth used materials like this. A sound made her freeze, a low, rhythmic pulsing that seemed to emerge from the wreckage itself. She pressed her ear closer to the largest piece of debris, a curved section that might have been part of a hull. The pulsing continued, steady as a heartbeat, accompanied by what sounded almost like whispered voices, speaking in no language she recognized. Maya jerked back, her pulse spiking. She'd spent enough time alone in wilderness areas to know the tricks that isolation could play on the mind, but this felt different, too real, too consistent. She forced herself to methodically document everything, taking notes with numbed fingers while fighting the growing urge to flee. The debris field stretched roughly 50 meters in diameter, with the largest pieces concentrated near what appeared to be a primary impact crater. But even the crater seemed wrong, too perfectly circular, its edges too clean. Maya had studied crash sites during her emergency response training, and natural physics should have created something far more chaotic. She was examining a smaller fragment when movement caught her peripheral vision. Maya spun toward the tree line, her hand instinctively moving to the bear spray on her belt. Nothing, just the endless ranks of snow-laden spruce and the whisper of wind through branches. But the feeling of being observed pressed against her consciousness like a physical weight. Maya completed her circuit of the debris field in 20 minutes, though each step felt like a small act of courage. Whatever had crashed here, it hadn't been airborne for long. The impact patterns suggested a steep, controlled descent rather than a chaotic fall. Someone or something had tried to land this craft. As she prepared to leave, a glint of different metal caught her eye. Partially buried beneath one of the larger debris pieces, she spotted what looked like a cylindrical object about the size of a thermos. Unlike the hull fragments, this piece appeared to be made of conventional titanium alloy, though it bore strange markings etched around its circumference. Maya worked carefully to extract the cylinder, using her ice axe to chip away the frozen earth. The object came free with surprising ease, as if the permafrost had barely begun to grip it. The cylinder felt heavier than its size suggested, and when she shook it gently, something shifted inside with a liquid sound. The markings around its surface weren't quite like any alphabet she recognized, yet something about their arrangement felt familiar. Not the symbols themselves, but the mathematical precision of their spacing. They reminded her of the periodic table's structure, or perhaps molecular diagrams. A branch snapped somewhere behind her. Maya wheeled around, the cylinder clutched against her chest. This time she was certain something large had moved through the underbrush at the forest's edge, too large and too deliberate to be wind displacement. She strained her eyes against the afternoon gloom, searching for any sign of movement among the shadows. She secured the cylinder in her pack alongside her camera and notes, then began a tactical withdrawal toward her cached supplies. Her route took her in a wide arc that would reveal anyone attempting to follow, while keeping the densest part of the forest between herself and the source of the sound. Maya had covered perhaps 100 meters when she heard it again, that rhythmic pulsing, but louder now, coming from multiple directions, not just from the crash site behind her, but from the forest ahead and to both sides. The sound seemed to be coordinating, different sources falling into synchronized patterns that made her skin crawl. Whatever was out here with her, it wasn't human, and it was communicating. Metallic fragment felt impossibly warm against Maya's gloved fingers, as if it harbored some internal heat source that defied the sub-zero temperatures. She turned it over in her palm, studying the strange surface that seemed to shift between silver and deep blue, depending on the angle of her headlamp. Whatever alloy this was, it wasn't in any metallurgy textbook she'd ever seen. A sharp crack echoed through the forest behind her. Maya's head snapped up, her grip tightening on the fragment. The sound had been deliberate, not the random settling of snow-laden branches, but the distinct snap of something substantial breaking underfoot. Her breathing slowed as every survival instinct kicked into high gear. She killed her headlamp and crouched low, letting her eyes adjust to the pale moonlight filtering through the canopy. The forest fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the whisper of wind through pine needles. Maya counted her heartbeats, forcing herself to remain motionless despite every fiber of her being screaming to run. Another sound, closer this time, a rhythmic crunching that could only be footsteps in snow. Maya slipped the fragment into her jacket pocket and slowly rose to her feet. Through the trees, perhaps 50 yards away, she caught a glimpse of movement. A dark shape moving with purpose through the shadows, too large and coordinated to be any animal native to these woods. Her mind raced through possibilities. Another researcher? A member of some undisclosed military operation? The nearest civilization was over 100 miles away, and she hadn't seen any aircraft or vehicle tracks during her approach to the site. The figure paused, and Maya held her breath. Even at this distance, something about its posture struck her as wrong. It stood too still, too straight, like a predator that had caught a scent. Then it turned in her direction. Maya didn't wait to see more. She moved silently through the trees, using every technique her father had taught her during their hunting trips in the Cascade Mountains. Step on the balls of her feet, avoid dry branches, use the wind to mask any unavoidable noise. The crash site fell behind her as she worked her way toward a ridgeline that would give her both cover and a vantage point. The footsteps resumed, and they were definitely following her trail. Her pulse hammered as she climbed, using exposed roots and rock faces to avoid leaving clear tracks in the snow. The fragment in her pocket seemed to grow warmer, almost hot now, though that could have been her imagination. Everything about this situation defied rational explanation. At the ridgeline, Maya found a cluster of boulders that provided concealment while giving her a clear view of the forest below. She settled into position and controlled her breathing, watching for any sign of pursuit. The figure emerged from the tree line with an unnatural grace that made Maya's skin crawl. In the moonlight, She could see it was roughly human-shaped, but moved with a fluid precision that seemed almost mechanical. It wore what looked like a dark uniform or suit, and its head swept back and forth in a systematic search pattern. Maya fumbled for her binoculars with numb fingers, desperate for a clearer view. Through the lenses, details that should have been reassuring instead filled her with dread. The figure's face was pale, almost luminescent, with features that were close to human but somehow off, too symmetrical, too perfect. When it turned toward her hiding spot, she saw that its eyes reflected the moonlight like an animal's. The thing stopped directly below her position and tilted its head at an impossible angle, nearly 90 degrees to the left. Maya bit back a gasp and pressed herself deeper into the shadows between the rocks. But as she began her careful descent from the ridge, Maya realized she had a more immediate problem. The warm pulse emanating from the metal piece in her pocket had developed a distinct rhythm, almost like a heartbeat, and if she could feel it through her gear, there was a good chance that whatever was hunting her could detect it too. The fragment wasn't just evidence of something extraordinary, it was a beacon, and she was carrying it deeper into the wilderness with no idea how to turn it off. The metallic fragment felt impossibly smooth between Maya's gloved fingers, its surface reflecting the aurora's green shimmer like liquid mercury. She'd examined hundreds of aircraft components during her military service, but this defied classification. No rivets, no welding marks, no manufacturing signatures, just seamless material that seemed to bend light around its edges. A sharp crack echoed through the silence. Maya's head snapped up, scanning the crash site's perimeter. The sound had come from the tree line, maybe 50 meters north. She pocketed the fragment and drew her sidearm in one fluid motion, safety off, barrel tracking toward the disturbance. Nothing moved among the skeletal birches. She counted her heartbeats. 15 seconds, 30, 45. The forest remained still, but something felt wrong. The normal sounds were missing. No wind through branches, no settling snow, no distant owl calls. Even the aurora's electromagnetic whisper had faded to nothing. Maya backed toward the main wreckage, keeping her weapon trained on the trees. Her breath crystallized in the sub-zero air, each exhalation marking precious seconds. Whatever had made that sound possessed enough weight to snap deadfall in these temperatures, wood that should be brittle as glass. Another crack, closer this time. Movement flickered between the trees, tall, angular, wrong somehow. Maya blinked hard, wondering if exhaustion was playing tricks with her vision. When she looked again, the shape had shifted position without seeming to cross the intervening space. Her radio crackled with static. "Base camp, this is Maya. Do you copy?" She whispered into her comm unit, while maintaining visual contact with the tree line. Nothing but white noise answered. The figure, if it was a figure, stood motionless now, partially obscured by shadow and distance. Maya's training kicked in, muscle memory from a dozen combat zones overriding her confusion. Threat assessment, unknown entity, potentially hostile, showing abnormal movement patterns. Response, maintain defensive position, attempt communication, prepare for contact. "I'm armed," she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the dead air. "Identify yourself." The shape tilted, like a head cocking to one side. Then it began moving again, and Maya's blood turned to ice water. It wasn't walking. The thing glided between trees without disturbing the snow, without leaving tracks, without making the sounds that any physical presence should create. As it drew closer, details emerged that made her question her sanity. The radio burst to life, with a harsh squeal of feedback that made Maya wince. Through the static came fragments of voices, not her base camp, but something else entirely. Words in no language she recognized, rising and falling in patterns that seemed almost musical. When the transmission ended, the figure had vanished. Maya swept her light across the tree line, searching desperately for any trace of movement. Nothing. She sprinted to where it had been standing and found virgin snow, undisturbed and pristine. No footprints, no impressions, no evidence that anything had passed this way. But the trees told a different story. Branches hung at wrong angles, bark scored with marks that looked almost like symbols, and beneath the scent of pine and snow lay something else, ozone and heated metal, the same smell that clung to the crash site. Maya activated her GPS unit and marked the coordinates. Whatever was happening here, she needed backup, real backup, not search and rescue teams with good intentions and inadequate equipment. This situation required specialists, people who dealt with things that officially didn't exist. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline silence that seemed to press against Maya's eardrums. She crouched beside the alien craft, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air as she studied the control panel she'd managed to activate. The symbols pulsed with that same ethereal blue light, shifting and morphing in patterns that almost seemed familiar, like half-remembered dreams. Her fingers hovered over the surface, trembling not from cold but from anticipation. Every instinct screamed caution, yet something deeper urged her forward. The device responded to her proximity, symbols brightening as her hand drew near. A soft chime echoed from within the craft, followed by a low humming that seemed to resonate in her chest. The panel flickered, and suddenly the symbols began arranging themselves into something that made her blood freeze. Numbers, human numbers, coordinates. Maya yanked her hand back, stumbling in the snow. The display continued showing the familiar numerals, latitude and longitude that she recognized with growing horror. They marked her home base camp, 40 miles south. But more unsettling was the timestamp glowing beneath, today's date, 3 hours from now. "No way in hell," she whispered, her voice lost in the vast emptiness. A distant sound made her spin around, the distinctive whop-whop of helicopter rotors cutting through the Arctic air. Maya's heart hammered as she scanned the sky, spotting a black speck growing larger against the grey clouds. Military by the sound of it, heavy transport. Without thinking, she pressed both palms against the alien console. The humming intensified, and the craft shuddered beneath her touch. The display shifted, showing what looked like a three-dimensional map of the surrounding area. Red dots appeared scattered across the terrain, some moving, others stationary. The helicopter showed as a larger red triangle, accompanied by smaller dots that could only be personnel. They were coming for the crash site, coming for the craft, coming for her. Maya's mind raced. How had they found this place so quickly? The storm should have covered any tracks, any signals, unless the craft itself had been transmitting, calling for help, or sending data to whoever had been tracking it. She looked at the console again, noticing new symbols emerging. These seemed different, more urgent. As she focused on them, images flashed in her mind, not her own memories, but something else. A vast ship hanging in the darkness above Earth. Beings that moved with purpose through corridors filled with that same blue light, and somewhere among them, unmistakably human figures in military uniforms. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't first contact. This was something far more complex, far more terrifying. Humans were already involved, had been involved, which meant the crash wasn't an accident, it was an escape. The helicopter sound grew louder. Maya could see it clearly now, a massive black aircraft, accompanied by 2 smaller escort choppers. They'd be here in minutes. She grabbed her pack and started backing away from the craft, but the console pulsed brighter, almost desperately. The coordinates on the screen changed, showing a new location, coordinates that pointed to a spot roughly 10 miles northeast, in the heart of an uncharted glacier field. A new symbol appeared, and with it came another flash of understanding. The crashed craft was just a fragment, a small piece of something much larger. The coordinates it was showing marked where the main vessel waited, hidden beneath layers of ice and snow. But the knowledge came with a terrible certainty. She wasn't the first person to find alien technology in Alaska. The military presence, the coordination, the speed of their response, this had all happened before. She made her decision. Maya pulled out her GPS device and programmed in the coordinates from the alien console. The location was brutal terrain, the kind that would challenge even her considerable survival skills. But it was also terrain that would make pursuit incredibly difficult. As she prepared to leave, the craft's console dimmed, but not before displaying one final symbol. This time, the meaning came crystal clear, a warning. Whatever was hidden at those coordinates, others were looking for it too, others who would kill to keep their secrets buried in the ice. Maya shouldered her pack and began moving toward the glacier field, using every technique she knew to mask her trail. Behind her, the helicopters settled near the crash site, disgorging teams of armed soldiers who moved with the precision of a well-rehearsed operation. She was no longer just a survivor lost in the wilderness. She was a witness to something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden, carrying coordinates to a truth buried in Alaska's frozen heart. The metallic hum grew louder as Maya pressed herself against the ice wall, her breath forming crystalline clouds in the frigid air. Through the translucent barrier, she could see movement, deliberate, methodical shapes that defied the natural chaos of the storm outside. Her fingers tightened around the grip of her survival knife, though she knew it would be useless against whatever technology had brought down that craft. The sound changed pitch, becoming more rhythmic, almost like breathing. Maya's pulse quickened as she realized the noise was scanning, sweeping back and forth across the terrain. They were looking for something, or someone. She forced herself to remain perfectly still, counting the seconds between each sweep. 37, 38. The pattern was consistent enough that she might be able to predict the gaps. But predict them for what? She had nowhere to run in this labyrinth of ice, and the storm outside would kill her just as efficiently as whatever was hunting her. A new sound joined the chorus, footsteps, but not quite right. Too precise, too evenly spaced, as if measured by machinery rather than driven by organic rhythm. Maya closed her eyes and listened, trying to map the movement through audio alone. 2 sources, maybe 3, moving in a coordinated search pattern that was gradually tightening around her position. The temperature in her hiding spot seemed to drop another 10 degrees, and she realized her body heat might be giving her away. She'd read about thermal imaging in military applications, but this felt different. The cold seemed to be actively seeking her out, probing for warmth like fingers of ice, reaching into every crevice. A shadow passed directly in front of her hiding spot, and Maya caught her first clear glimpse of her pursuer through a crack in the ice. The figure was humanoid but wrong in subtle ways that made her brain struggle to process what she was seeing. Too tall, joints that bent at slightly incorrect angles, movements that flowed with an uncanny precision. It wore no visible protection against the cold, despite temperatures that should have killed any unprotected human in minutes. The being stopped directly in front of her concealment. Maya held her breath, watching as its head, if that's what it was, tilted in a distinctly non-human manner. It remained motionless for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, then moved on with that same unsettling fluid grace. She waited until the footsteps faded, before allowing herself to breathe normally again. The metallic humming had moved deeper into the ice formations, but she knew it would return. This was clearly a systematic search, and they had time on their side. She needed to move. Maya studied the ice cavern more carefully, looking for any passage that might lead away from the search pattern. The formations here were ancient, carved by wind and weather over decades, creating a natural maze that might work to her advantage if she could navigate it without getting lost herself. A faint glow emanated from deeper in the cave system, different from the harsh white light she'd seen at the crash site. This was warmer, almost organic in quality. Against her better judgment, she found herself drawn toward it. Every survival instinct screamed at her to avoid unknown light sources, but her current hiding spot would only remain safe for so long. The passage opened into a larger chamber, and Maya stopped short at what she saw. The walls here weren't just ice. They were lined with the same metallic material she'd seen at the crash site, but these formations looked deliberately placed, almost grown rather than built. The warm glow emanated from veins of light that pulsed through the metal like a slow heartbeat. This wasn't just a crash site. This was a base, or a facility, or something that had been here far longer than a single downed aircraft could account for. The implications hit her like a physical blow. This isolated wilderness, chosen specifically for its remoteness from human contact, had been occupied long before she'd arrived. A sound behind her made Maya spin around, but the passage remained empty. The metallic humming was returning, closer now, accompanied by those two precise footsteps. She was trapped between the unknown depths of this facility and the systematic hunters behind her. The veins of light in the walls began to pulse faster, and Maya realized her presence had triggered some kind of response. The facility was waking up, acknowledging her intrusion, and she could feel the attention of vast systems focusing on her location, like the gaze of some sleeping giant suddenly opening its eyes. She had to choose, face the searchers behind her, or venture deeper into technology that humanity wasn't ready to understand. The metallic hum grew stronger as Maya pressed deeper into the cavern, her headlamp cutting through the oppressive darkness. Ice crystals hung from the ceiling like frozen tears, and her breath created ghostly clouds that dissipated into the void ahead. The walls bore strange markings, not carved by human hands, but burned or etched by something far more sophisticated. She paused at a junction where the tunnel split into 3 passages. The humming seemed to emanate from the center path, but her survival instinct screamed against following the obvious route. In the wilderness, the easy path often led to death. She chose the left passage instead, moving with practiced silence despite the crunch of ice beneath her boots. The tunnel curved downward, and Maya noticed the temperature rising slightly. No natural cave system should be this warm this deep in the Alaskan permafrost. As she rounded a bend, pale blue light filtered through the darkness ahead, not from any source she could identify, but an ambient glow that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the mysterious humming. Maya extinguished her headlamp and let her eyes adjust. The blue radiance revealed a vast underground chamber, far larger than anything that should exist beneath this frozen landscape. Massive support structures rose from the floor like the ribs of some enormous beast, and between them banks of what could only be described as machinery hummed with alien purpose. She crouched behind a formation of ice-covered rock and surveyed the space. No movement, no signs of immediate threat, but every instinct told her she was being watched. The crashed object above had been just the tip of something much larger, a facility that extended deep underground, hidden from satellites and thermal imaging by the natural camouflage of the Alaskan wilderness. Moving from shadow to shadow, Maya approached the nearest bank of machinery. Up close, she could see that the equipment was definitely not of human origin. The surfaces were seamlessly smooth, without visible joints or fasteners, as if each component had been grown rather than assembled. Symbols that hurt to look at directly were etched into panels that glowed with that same eerie blue light. A soft scraping sound made her freeze. Somewhere in the chamber, something was moving. Maya drew her knife and pressed herself against the curved surface of the nearest support pillar. The scraping came again, closer now, accompanied by what sounded like whispered voices, speaking in no language she recognized. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate as she'd learned during countless nights alone in hostile wilderness. 3 figures emerged from the shadows on the far side of the chamber. At first glance they appeared human, walking upright, roughly the right proportions. But something was wrong with their movements, too fluid and precise, as if they were marionettes guided by an expert puppeteer. Their skin had a waxy, translucent quality that reflected the blue glow of the machinery. They moved with purpose, checking various panels and making adjustments that caused the humming to shift in pitch and intensity. Maya watched them work, her mind racing to process what she was seeing. Were these the beings who had piloted the crashed craft? Some kind of rescue or recovery team? One of the figures stopped and turned in her direction. Maya held her breath, pressing deeper into the shadows. The being's face was almost human but wrong in subtle ways. Eyes too large, features too symmetrical, expression too vacant. It stared directly at her hiding spot for long seconds before turning away to continue its work. Maya waited until all three had moved to the far end of the chamber before creeping toward what appeared to be a control station. The surface was covered with those painful-to-observe symbols, but among them she spotted something that made her blood run cold, a display showing what could only be a map of North America, with dozens of pulsing red dots scattered across the continent. Each dot was labeled with coordinates and what looked like status indicators. Maya recognized several locations, major cities, military installations, research facilities. Whatever was happening here wasn't isolated to this remote corner of Alaska. It was part of something much larger, a network that spanned the entire continent. She pulled out her satellite phone, hoping to photograph the display, but the device showed no signal, not just weak reception but complete electronic dead zone. The machinery around her was generating some kind of interference field, cutting off all communication with the outside world. A new sound echoed through the chamber, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The three figures stopped their work and began moving toward Maya's position with sudden, alarming purpose. Their vacant expressions had been replaced by something that looked almost predatory. Maya pocketed the useless phone and looked for an escape route. The entrance she'd used was blocked by the approaching figures, but she spotted what looked like another tunnel opening on the opposite side of the chamber. Getting there would mean crossing open ground, exposing herself completely. The beings were getting closer, their movements now distinctly inhuman as they glided across the floor with unnatural speed. Maya gripped her knife tighter and prepared to run. Maya's breath crystallized in the frigid air as she crouched behind a cluster of ice-encrusted boulders, watching the figures move with unsettling coordination across the crash site below. Through her binoculars, she counted 6 of them, all wearing matching dark winter gear that seemed too pristine for the harsh conditions. They moved with military precision, systematically examining the wreckage she'd discovered just days earlier. The metallic object that had captivated her attention now swarmed with activity. Portable equipment hummed quietly in the distance, and she could make out cables snaking across the snow like black veins. Whatever these people were doing, they'd been planning it for far longer than she'd been in this wilderness. Her radio crackled softly against her hip, but she didn't dare respond. The transmission from earlier still echoed in her mind. Someone had been tracking her movements, knew exactly where she was. Now she understood why her satellite beacon had been acting erratically. She wasn't just being monitored, she was being hunted. A sharp crack echoed across the frozen landscape. Maya pressed herself lower, watching as one of the figures operated what looked like a cutting torch against the object's hull. Sparks cascaded in brilliant orange arcs, creating temporary constellations against the perpetual twilight. The metal they were cutting through didn't behave like anything she recognized. Instead of clean edges, it seemed to heal and resist their efforts. Maya's survival instincts screamed at her to retreat, to pack her gear and disappear into the vast wilderness where she could lose any pursuit. But something about the scene below held her captive. The way the figures moved, their technology, even their presence here in this remote location, none of it added up to any government operation she could imagine. The wind shifted, carrying fragments of conversation up the slope. She strained to listen, but the words were distorted by distance and the constant whisper of snow across ice. What she could hear didn't sound like English, or any language she recognized. The cadence was wrong, almost rhythmic, like a series of calculated tones rather than natural speech. One of the figures suddenly stopped working and turned toward her position. Maya's blood froze as the person seemed to stare directly at her hiding spot. Through her binoculars, she could see the figure's face was obscured by some kind of reflective visor that didn't match the rest of their winter gear. The figure stood motionless for several heartbeats before making a gesture to the others. Maya didn't wait to see their response. She belly-crawled backward through the snow, using the boulder field as cover, her rifle slung carefully across her back. Every movement sent small cascades of ice crystals sliding down the slope, sounds that seemed deafening in the Arctic silence. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she put distance between herself and the crash site. 20 minutes later, she reached her emergency cache, a carefully concealed supply depot she'd established 2 miles from her main camp. Her hands shook as she retrieved additional ammunition and cold weather rations, not from the temperature but from the adrenaline coursing through her system. She'd survived grisly encounters, whiteout storms, and equipment failures, but this felt different, more dangerous. As she reorganized her pack, Maya tried to process what she'd witnessed. The cutting operation suggested they were trying to get inside the object, which meant they didn't necessarily know what was in there either, but their equipment and coordination indicated serious backing, military, corporate, or something else entirely. The radio on her hip crackled again, this time with a clearer signal. "Maya Chen, please respond. We know you're monitoring this frequency." The voice was calm, professional, with just a hint of accent she couldn't place. "We're not here to harm you. We simply need to discuss what you've seen." She almost laughed at the absurdity. People who simply wanted to discuss things didn't typically track solo hikers into the Alaska wilderness with military precision. Maya switched off the radio and removed its battery. Whatever communication advantage they thought they had, she wasn't going to make it easy for them. The temperature was dropping as evening approached, and she needed to establish a new camp away from her previous location. Maya shouldered her pack and began moving deeper into the wilderness, following a route she'd scouted earlier that would take her through terrain difficult for anyone less experienced to navigate. As she trudged through knee-deep snow, weaving between stands of ice-laden spruce trees, Maya couldn't shake the image of that figure staring up at her position. There had been something unnaturally still about the moment, as if the person had been listening rather than looking. She'd spent enough time in the wilderness to trust her instincts, and every instinct she possessed was telling her that whatever was happening at that crash site, it was far beyond anything she'd prepared for when she'd planned this expedition. The alien device pulsed with increasing urgency as Maya pressed deeper into the cave system, its bioluminescent patterns casting dancing shadows on the ice-slicked walls. Each step forward felt like a betrayal of every survival instinct she'd honed over 15 years in the wilderness, yet something compelled her to continue. The temperature had dropped noticeably, her breath forming thick clouds that dissipated slowly in the still air. Behind her, she could hear Marcus struggling to keep pace, his breathing labored and uneven. The corporate executive wasn't built for this kind of physical demand, and Maya found herself torn between irritation at his weakness and a grudging respect for his determination to follow her into the unknown. "How much further?" Marcus wheezed, his voice echoing off the crystalline formations that jutted from the cave ceiling like frozen teeth. Maya didn't answer. She couldn't. The device in her hands seemed to be pulling her forward with an almost magnetic force, its alien script shifting and flowing across its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly. She'd seen enough crashed aircraft in her time to know that whatever had fallen from the sky 3 days ago wasn't from any government she recognized. The materials were too advanced, too organic in their construction, as if they'd been grown rather than manufactured. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, and Maya's headlamp beam disappeared into the darkness above. Ice formations stretched up like pillars supporting an invisible ceiling, and the air carried a metallic taste that made her tongue tingle unpleasantly. But it was what lay at the center of the chamber that made her blood freeze. The pod was larger than the wreckage she'd discovered earlier, its surface smooth and pearl-like, unmarred by the violence of atmospheric entry. Conduits of the same bioluminescent material snaked across its hull, pulsing in rhythm with the device she carried. As they approached, the alien script on Maya's device began to glow more intensely, and she felt a vibration through the metal that seemed to resonate in her bones. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered, his corporate facade finally cracking completely. "What is that thing?" Maya circled the pod slowly, noting the way frost formed and melted in patterns around its base. The thing was generating heat, which meant it was active, operational. Her military training kicked in, cataloging details, no visible weapons, no defensive systems she could identify, but that didn't mean they weren't there. The pod was roughly the size of a small aircraft, but its organic curves suggested something designed for a very different kind of passenger. A seam appeared along the pod's surface as they watched, hairline thin at first, then widening with a soft exhalation of vapor. The sound was disturbingly biological, like something taking its first breath. Maya raised her rifle instinctively, though she doubted conventional ammunition would be effective against technology this advanced. "We should go," Marcus said, backing away. "We should go right now and pretend we never saw this." But Maya couldn't move. The device in her left hand was vibrating so intensely now that her arm was going numb, and the script was cycling through configurations so rapidly they blurred together. Whatever was in that pod was responding to her presence, or more specifically, to the device she carried. The seam widened further, revealing an interior that glowed with the same bioluminescent patterns. Mist poured from the opening, carrying a scent like ozone and copper pennies. Maya's headlamp beam penetrated the vapor enough to reveal the outline of something inside, something roughly human-sized, but wrong in ways her mind struggled to process. Movement, slow, deliberate, as if the occupant was awakening from a long sleep. "Maya!" Marcus's voice was tight with panic. "Maya, we need to leave. Now." She knew he was right, but she also knew it was too late. Whatever process they'd interrupted by entering the chamber, by bringing the device into proximity with the pod, it had already begun. The bioluminescent patterns were spreading beyond the pod now, creeping across the ice floor in branching networks that reminded her uncomfortably of neural pathways. A hand emerged from the vapor. At least, she thought it was a hand. It had the right number of digits, but they were too long, too pale, and they moved with an articulation that suggested additional joints. The skin had the same pearl-like quality as the pod's exterior and seemed to shimmer with its own internal light. The device in Maya's grip suddenly went dark, its alien script fading to black. In the silence that followed, she could hear something that might have been breathing, or might have been the pod systems cycling down. The hand withdrew into the vapor, and for a moment she thought whatever was inside had retreated. Then it spoke. The words were in no language she recognized, but somehow she understood them anyway, as if they bypassed her ears entirely and spoke directly to her mind. The meaning was simple, terrifying, and absolutely clear. "And you have awakened us too soon." She saw Earth from impossible heights, not through human eyes, but through something that perceived electromagnetic spectrums and quantum fluctuations. The planet pulsed with life, a beacon of biological complexity that had drawn attention from across the void. But there were other signals, too, darker ones emanating from deep beneath the surface. Maya fought to maintain her sense of self as more visions flooded through. Ancient chambers carved from bedrock, filled with geometric patterns that hurt to perceive directly. Things that had been sleeping in the Earth's core for millions of years, stirring now as human technology probed deeper into previously untouched realms. "The deep mining operations," she managed to say aloud, though speaking felt like moving through thick syrup. "You're talking about the deep mining operations. Your species drills without understanding. You have awakened guardians that were meant to remain dormant until your son dies." The ship around her seemed to respond to the entity's agitation. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and she felt a subtle vibration through the floor. Outside, the aurora twisted into new configurations, painting the ice field in shades of green and violet that seemed almost accusatory. Maya's training kicked in, forcing her to compartmentalize the overwhelming sensations. She needed information, needed to understand what she was dealing with. "What are you? Why did you crash here?" The answer came not in words, but in a rush of sensation. She experienced the ship's final moments, systems failing as it fought to remain airborne, emergency protocols engaging as it sought the most isolated landing zone on the continent. The entity hadn't crashed, it had performed a controlled emergency landing. "We are scouts, watchers. When the deep signals began emanating from your world's core, the collective sent us to investigate." "The collective?" Maya's voice echoed strangely in the chamber. Another wave of images, a network of consciousness spanning star systems, beings of crystalline and energy sharing thoughts across impossible distances. They had been monitoring Earth's development, waiting to see if humanity would mature beyond its destructive tendencies before making contact. But the deep awakening changes everything. The entities below care nothing for surface dwellers. When they rise, they will reshape your world according to patterns older than your species' evolutionary line. Maya felt her legs give out, and she sank to the floor of the chamber. The scope of what she was learning threatened to overwhelm her entirely. How long do we have? The deep ones measure time differently. What you call years, they experience as moments. But your mining has accelerated their awakening, perhaps decades, perhaps less. She thought of her life back in Anchorage, of the people she knew who had no idea that humanity's existence hung in the balance. Why tell me this? What can one person do? The entity's presence in her mind shifted, and she sensed something like approval. You survived the ice fields alone. You found our vessel when trained search teams could not. You entered despite fear, driven by need to understand. These qualities suggest adaptive potential. You want me to warn people. We want you to help us prevent catastrophe. Our ship cannot leave, too much damage from the emergency landing, but we can modify your communication devices, boost their signals beyond your planet's standard networks. The collective must know of the acceleration. They may be able to intervene before the deep entities fully manifest. Maya's mind reeled with the implications. First contact with an alien intelligence, and it came with news of an existential threat to humanity. She looked around the chamber, noting details she'd missed before, the way certain crystalline formations pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, how the bioluminescent panels seemed to respond to her emotional state. The modifications to my equipment, she said slowly, will they survive the journey back to civilization? If you accept our proposal, you will not make that journey alone. Before she could ask what that meant, her radio crackled to life with a burst of static. Through the interference, she caught fragments of a transmission. Search coordinates, helicopter rotors, her name repeated urgently. The rescue team, she breathed. They are 7 kilometers southeast, moving in this direction. Their electromagnetic signatures preceded them. Maya stood on unsteady legs, decision crystallizing in her mind. She had entered this wilderness seeking solitude and challenge. Instead, she'd found responsibility on a scale she'd never imagined. But walking away wasn't an option, not when the future of human civilization hung in the balance. If I do this, she said, if I help you contact your collective, what happens to me? The entity's response carried overtones of respect and something that might have been gratitude. You become the bridge between worlds, the first human ambassador to species your kind has never dreamed existed. The radio crackled again, voices growing clearer as the rescue team approached. The hibernation chamber, a voice said behind her. Maya spun around, the device raised defensively. Dr. Reeves stood at the tunnel entrance, but something was different about him. His movements were too fluid, too controlled, and his eyes reflected the blue light even in the shadows. We? The thing wearing Reeves' face gestured toward the pods, the last of our kind. We've been sleeping here for longer than your species has existed, waiting for the ice to recede, for the climate to change. Your planet's warming has finally begun to wake us. Maya's grip tightened on the device. What do you want? Survival, adaptation. Your species has proven remarkably resilient, much like us. We can coexist, but changes must be made. The Reeves thing stepped closer. The device you're holding is a neural interface. It will allow the integration process to begin. Integration. Your consciousness preserved, enhanced, but serving a greater purpose. The fear, the cold, the constant struggle for survival, all of that ends. You become something more. Maya thought of the real Reeves, probably frozen somewhere in the wilderness. How many others have you taken? The research team was first. They were closest when the ship crashed, when our scout tried to return and failed. We learned much from them about your current civilization. The thing's smile was perfectly human and completely wrong. You were unexpected. Most humans avoid the deep wilderness. We thought we had more time. The device in Maya's hand grew warmer, and she could feel something probing at the edges of her consciousness. A presence trying to slip inside her thoughts like fingers through cracks in ice. She fought against it, focusing on the weight of her pack, the cold air in her lungs, the solid reality of her own body. Fighting it only makes the process more difficult, the Reeves thing said. Your friend Marcus stopped struggling quite quickly. Maya's blood went cold. Marcus? He followed your trail. Quite skilled for a human, currently adapting in Pod 7. It gestured toward one of the glowing containers. Soon he'll help us convince you to stop this pointless resistance. Rage flared in Maya's chest, cutting through the alien presence trying to worm into her mind. She'd led Marcus into this. Her expedition, her discovery had doomed him. The device pulsed again, and this time she felt something different. Not an invasion, but a connection. Images flashed through her mind. The ship's desperate flight from something immense and terrible. The crash that scattered its cargo across the ice. The crew's failed attempt to reach this buried facility. The device wasn't just a neural interface. It was a key, and she was standing at a lock. You don't understand what you're holding, the Reeves thing said, its calm facade cracking. That device requires genetic compatibility. Only our species can. Maya pressed the device against a smooth panel on the wall. Light erupted through the chamber, and the breathing rhythm of the pods shifted to a higher, more urgent frequency. Symbols appeared on the crystalline surfaces, alien writing that somehow she could read. Emergency protocols activated. Hibernation cycle interrupted. System failure imminent. What have you done? The Reeves thing's voice distorted, becoming something inhuman. What I do best, Maya said, already moving toward a passage that had opened on the far side of the chamber. Survive. Alarms began to sound throughout the facility, and the pods started to crack. The alien's mind touched hers with unexpected gentleness, like fingers trailing through water. Maya gasped as images flooded her consciousness, not the violent intrusion she'd feared, but something closer to a shared dream. She saw their world as it had been, crystalline spires reaching toward twin suns, beings of light and thought moving through structures that defied physics. Then came the darkness, literal and metaphorical. The dying of their star, the desperate search for new homes, the fracturing of their civilization into factions. When we were not conquerors, the voice whispered in her mind, and we were refugees. Then why the secrecy? Maya spoke aloud, her voice echoing in the strange chamber. Why not make contact openly? The being's form shimmered, revealing glimpses of what might have been its true appearance. Elongated limbs, features that seemed to shift like mercury. More species fears what it does not understand. We learned this from observation. Those who came before us tried direct contact with other worlds. The results were catastrophic. Through their connection, Maya witnessed flashes of cosmic horror, worlds torn apart by panic, civilizations that destroyed themselves rather than accept alien contact, entire star systems becoming graveyards of xenophobic wars. So we wait, we watch, we protect ourselves until understanding becomes possible. But something went wrong with your ship, Maya said, pieces falling into place. The crash wasn't intentional. A wave of what she interpreted as sadness washed through their link. A navigation error. Our technology, though advanced, is not infallible. We fell from the sky like Icarus from your myths. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic air. How long have you been watching us? Long enough to know that some among your kind show promise. You, Maya Chen, survived in conditions that would kill most of your species. You showed compassion for a creature you thought might be dangerous. These qualities suggest evolution, emotional, intellectual, spiritual. The flattery made her uncomfortable. I'm nothing special. Any experienced survivalist could have. No. The mental voice was firm. But we have observed many. You possess something rare among your kind, the ability to adapt without losing your humanity. Through the neural connection, Maya sensed movement beyond the chamber. The knowledge hit her like ice water. They weren't alone. Other beings moved through the ship, and some were not as peaceful as her current companion. "Are factions among us, as there are among you," the being explained, catching her realization. "Some believe contact is premature. Others grow impatient with waiting. What do they want to do?" Before the being could answer, Maya felt the floor vibrate beneath her feet. The crystalline walls pulsed with amber light, and she heard something that made her blood freeze. Human voices, muffled but unmistakably desperate. "Who is that?" she demanded. The being's form solidified slightly, taking on more recognizably humanoid features than the others you seek. "The missing expedition members, they are subjects of study." Maya's hands clenched into fists. "What kind of study?" "Not harmful," the being assured her quickly. "But not voluntary either. My colleagues believe that direct neural mapping is necessary to understand your species' psychological patterns. They wish to determine if humanity is ready for contact by examining individual minds. They're being used as lab rats." Maya's voice carried a dangerous edge, and crude, but not inaccurate comparison. The admission hung between them like a blade. Maya felt the being's genuine regret, but also its sense of helplessness. Through their connection, she glimpsed the political complexities of its kind. Ancient protocols, competing philosophies, the weight of species survival influencing every decision. "I cannot simply release them," it continued, "and to do so would violate our most sacred laws and potentially doom both our species." "Then we have a problem," Maya said quietly, "because I won't leave without them." The being's surprise rippled through their mental link. "And you would risk your life for strangers?" "They're not strangers, they're people. And I don't abandon people." Another vibration shook the chamber, stronger this time. The amber lights flickered, and Maya heard new sounds, mechanical whirring, electronic beeps that suggested machinery powering up. "Only others have detected your presence," the being said urgently. "I know you are here. Here. Will they hurt me? Then they will study you, as they are studying the others. The process is uncomfortable." Maya's mind raced. She was trapped in an alien ship, facing beings with technology beyond her comprehension, with no weapons except her survival instincts and whatever goodwill she'd built with this one entity. "Is there another way out of here?" "Yes, but show me." The being hesitated. "If you attempt to rescue your people, you will become a hostile force in their assessment. They will not show restraint. That's a risk I'll have to take." Through their connection, Maya felt something she hadn't expected from an advanced alien consciousness. Admiration tinged with something resembling hope. "Perhaps," the being mused, "you are exactly what both our species need." The chamber door dilated with a soft hiss, revealing a corridor that stretched into blue-lit infinity. Maya took a deep breath and stepped forward into the unknown. Ice crystals fell from the cave ceiling as something massive passed overhead, casting shadows that shouldn't exist in the polar night. Maya's blood froze as she recognized the sound, the same harmonic resonance she'd heard from the crashed ship, but amplified, multiplied. "How many?" she demanded, grabbing the alien suit with her gloved hands. The material felt warm, almost organic. "Harvester fleet. 12 ships, surface, sterilization protocol." The creature's breathing became more labored. "Was reconnaissance only. Peaceful. But distress beacon, automatic." Maya's mind raced. 12 ships meant an invasion force, not explorers. She thought of Jack's research station, of the indigenous communities scattered across the Arctic, of billions of people who had no idea their world was about to change forever. "There has to be a way to stop them," she said, her voice cutting through the howling wind outside the cavern. The alien suit suddenly brightened, displaying holographic symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Signal, still transmitting. Damage beacon, stop fleet, but..." It gestured weakly toward the crashed ship. "Quantum entanglement matrix, unstable, touch wrong sequence. The translation dissolved into electronic noise before reforming. Planetary sterilization begins immediately. Maya stared at the pulsing lights emanating from the wreckage, half buried in the glacier. She'd survived grizzly attacks, avalanches, and Arctic storms that would kill most people in minutes. But this required precision she'd never trained for, with consequences beyond anything she'd ever imagined. "Show me," she said. The alien suit projected a three-dimensional map of the ship's interior, highlighting a path through twisted corridors to the communication array. Red symbols marked radiation hazards, structural instabilities, and what Maya assumed were security systems still functioning despite the crash. "Dangerous for your biology," the alien warned. "Radiation, cellular breakdown, minutes, not hours." "Then I'll make it quick." Maya checked her gear. Climbing rope, ice axes, emergency beacon, primitive tools for an impossible task. "What's the right sequence?" The hologram shifted, showing a complex pattern of touches across a hexagonal interface. Maya memorized it, knowing she'd only get one chance. The alien watched her with something that might have been respect or pity. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "My species. Explorers, not conquerors. Made mistake. Cannot fix mistake. But you." The translator faded, then strengthened. "Survival instinct, recognize kindred spirit." Another shadow passed overhead, closer this time. Through the cavern opening, Maya saw lights descending through the aurora, angular, purposeful, wrong. The vanguard of the fleet, preparing landing zones. She stood, shouldering her pack. "If I don't make it back—" "We'll know," the alien interrupted. "Either beacon stops or planet burns." Maya emerged from the cavern into air so cold it seared her lungs. The crashed ship loomed before her, its hull split open like a metallic flower. Steam rose from the breach where alien atmosphere met Arctic air, creating an otherworldly fog that obscured her vision. She rappelled down into the ship's interior, her headlamp cutting through darkness filled with floating debris and strange geometric patterns that shifted when she wasn't looking directly at them. The alien's map guided her through corridors that seemed to bend space itself, where up and down lost meaning. The radiation hit her at the third junction, a tingling in her bones that spoke of cellular damage accumulating with each step. She pushed forward, following the mental map burned into her memory, past chambers filled with incomprehensible technology and displays showing star charts of impossible complexity. The communication array dominated the ship's center, a crystalline structure the size of a small building, pulsing with energy that made her skin crawl. The hexagonal interface waited at its base, symbols shifting in patterns that suggested vast intelligence behind their design. Maya approached carefully, remembering the alien's warning about wrong sequences. Above her, the crystal matrix hummed with quantum harmonics that connected this wrecked ship to 12 others, crossing the void between stars. One mistake would turn this planet into a cinder. She placed her gloved hand on the first symbol, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance of her next moves. The interface responded to her touch with warmth that felt disturbingly alive, waiting for her to complete the sequence that would either save her world or damn it. She forced herself to keep moving, following the GPS coordinates burned into her memory. The extraction point was still 3 miles away, 3 miles through terrain that would challenge her even under ideal conditions. With the storm raging and unknown pursuers potentially tracking her every step, it might as well have been 300. The device pulsed more urgently now, its symbols shifting into configurations that made her eyes water to look at directly. Something was wrong, or rather, something was changing. The alien technology wasn't just responding to her presence anymore, it was responding to something else. Dr. Chen. The voice that emerged from the storm was calm, professional, and utterly without warmth. "Please step away from the artifact." Maya turned to see a figure materializing from the swirling snow like something from a nightmare. The man wore military-grade, Arctic gear, but there was something wrong with the way he moved, too fluid, too precise, as if the brutal conditions weren't affecting him at all. I'm afraid I can't do that, Maya called back, her hand moving instinctively to the survival knife at her belt. This technology doesn't belong to any government. The figure took another step forward, and Maya caught sight of his face beneath the tactical goggles. Human features, but with an unsettling quality that reminded her of the facility's sterile corridors. You misunderstand the situation, Dr. Chen. This isn't a negotiation. The device against her chest suddenly flared with heat, its symbols blazing so brightly she could see them through her thermal suit. Pain lanced through her skull as images flooded her mind, star maps, mathematical equations, and something that might have been coordinates. She gasped, staggering backward as understanding crashed over her like an avalanche. The facility hadn't been studying the crashed object, it had been waiting for it, waiting for someone to activate it and complete a signal that had been broadcasting across space for decades. And now, with the device fully awakened in her hands, that signal was finally reaching its intended destination. Above them, the clouds began to part, despite the raging storm, revealing a patch of star-filled sky that shouldn't have been possible in these weather conditions. Maya looked up and felt her sanity teeter on the edge of a precipice. Something was moving among the stars, something vast and impossibly distant, but growing larger by the second. "Thank you, Dr. Chen," the figure said, raising what looked like a standard tranquilizer gun. "Your part in this is now complete." Maya dove sideways as the weapon fired, the dart whistling past her ear to embed itself in the rock behind her. She rolled through the snow, came up running, and plunged into the storm with the device blazing against her chest like a captured star. Behind her, she heard the man speaking into a radio, his words lost in the wind, but his tone suggesting that the hunt was far from over. The entity that had been hunting her for days was inside, along with something else. Something that made her skin crawl with an instinctive terror that bypassed rational thought entirely. She activated her radio transmitter, the emergency beacon she'd been saving for this moment. If Agent Harrison's people were monitoring the frequencies, they'd have her location within minutes. The question was whether she'd live long enough for rescue to matter. The entrance to the structure dilated open with a sound like tearing silk. Maya's heart hammered as she glimpsed what lay beyond, a corridor that seemed to bend impossibly inward, walls that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. The air that escaped carried a metallic taste and something else, something organic and wrong. She had two choices: wait for whatever was inside to come for her, or take the fight to them. Maya chose to fight. She primed the explosive and hurled it through the opening, then sprinted along the structure's perimeter. The detonation came 3 seconds later, a brilliant orange flash that lit up the Arctic landscape and sent tremors through the ice shelf. Alien sounds erupted from within, high-pitched and furious. The distraction worked. Through the damaged entrance, she saw the creature that had stalked her, 8 feet tall, covered in what looked like segmented armor that shifted between mirror-bright and matte black. It moved with predatory grace toward the explosion site. But it wasn't alone. Behind it came others, smaller, more humanoid, but wrong in ways that made Maya's vision blur when she tried to focus on them. They moved in perfect synchronization, as if controlled by a single mind. Maya's survival instinct screamed at her to run, but she'd come too far to back down now. Someone needed to witness this. Someone needed to survive to tell the world what was happening in this frozen wasteland. She activated her helmet camera and began recording, whispering into the microphone. "This is Maya Chen, day 7 of what was supposed to be a solo expedition. I'm documenting what appears to be first contact with non-terrestrial intelligence. The crashed object I discovered isn't a craft, it's some kind of forward base or research station." The creatures were spreading out now, searching. Their movements suggested they knew she was close. Maya pressed herself deeper into a crevice between ice formations, trying to become invisible. The entities show signs of advanced technology and what might be hive mind behavior, she continued, recording. They've been studying our environment, possibly preparing for something larger. Agent Harrison was right. This isn't random. It's reconnaissance. A sound made her freeze. Footsteps. But not the creature's metallic gait. These were human. Someone was approaching from behind. Maya spun, her knife ready, and found herself face to face with Agent Harrison himself. His tactical gear was torn and bloody, his face gaunt with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with desperate purpose. "Thank God," he whispered. "I thought I was too late. How did you find me?" "Your beacon. We've had teams searching for 3 days." He gestured toward the alien structure. "How many are there?" "At least 6 that I've seen. Maybe more inside." Maya studied his face. "What aren't you telling me, Harrison? This isn't just about national security, is it?" His jaw tightened. 3 similar sites have appeared worldwide in the past month. London, Tokyo, Sao Paulo. This is the first one we've managed to reach before they finished whatever they're doing." "Finished what?" Before Harrison could answer, an inhuman shriek echoed across the ice. The creatures had found their trail. "We need to move. Now." Harrison pulled out what looked like a military-grade communication device. "Extraction team, this is Control. Package located. Requesting immediate evac at coordinates 77 Alpha. What about the site?" Maya asked. Harrison's expression darkened. "Sterilization protocol is already authorized. We have 12 minutes before this entire area becomes a crater." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. "You're going to nuke it?" "Low-yield tactical strike. It's the only way to be sure." The sound of pursuit was getting closer. Multiple entities now, moving fast across the ice. "Can you run?" Harrison asked, checking his sidearm. Maya nodded, though her legs felt like lead. "What about the others? The sites in London and Tokyo?" "Same protocol. Simultaneous strikes in 14 minutes, coordinated globally." He met her eyes. This conversation never happened. "The official story is equipment malfunction during a routine survey. The first creature appeared on the ridge above them, its armor gleaming in the Arctic sun." Harrison raised his weapon. "Time to go." Maya's breath crystallized in the frigid air as she stood at the edge of the installation's perimeter, watching smoke rise from the destroyed facility behind her. The explosion had torn through the underground complex, sealing whatever horrors remained in the ice-locked chambers below. But the silence that followed felt more ominous than any sound. The entity, or what remained of it, had not perished in the blast. She could feel its presence like a cold weight pressing against her consciousness, patient and calculating. The symbiotic organisms that had escaped the facility were already adapting to the harsh Alaskan environment, and Maya knew this was only the beginning. Her satellite phone crackled with static as she tried once more to reach the outside world. The electromagnetic interference from the crash site had intensified, creating a dead zone that stretched for miles in every direction. She was truly isolated now, the sole witness to humanity's first contact with something that defied every assumption about life in the universe. The journal she'd recovered from Dr. Sarah Chen, her sister, whose fate had brought her to this desolate place, contained encrypted coordinates and research notes that painted a terrifying picture. The entity wasn't just an alien life form. It was a reconnaissance probe, part of something much larger. The symbiotic organisms were designed to infiltrate and study potential host species, gathering intelligence for what Sarah's final entries suggested was an impending convergence. Maya pulled her parka tighter against the wind and began the treacherous journey back toward her base camp. Each step through the snow felt weighted with the knowledge that she carried the fate of her species on her shoulders. The government facility had been studying the entity for months, trying to weaponize its adaptive capabilities, but they had fundamentally misunderstood what they were dealing with. The organisms weren't just mimicking biological functions, they were rewriting the very concept of what life could become. Maya had seen the transformed researchers, their bodies altered beyond recognition, their minds networked into something that transcended individual consciousness. They weren't dead. They had become something else entirely, something that served the entity's incomprehensible agenda. As darkness fell across the tundra, Maya activated her emergency beacon, knowing it was likely futile but desperate to warn someone about what was coming. the symbiotic organisms would spread beyond this containment zone, carried by wildlife, weather patterns, and eventually human contact. The explosion had bought time, nothing more. Her GPS unit flickered erratically, the display showing impossible readings that suggested reality itself was becoming unstable around the crash site. Maya had experienced temporal distortions during her escape from the facility, moments where she seemed to exist in multiple timelines simultaneously, where cause and effect became fluid concepts. The entity existed partially outside conventional spacetime, which explained how it could manipulate matter and energy in ways that violated known physics. It wasn't bound by the same limitations as terrestrial life, and its presence was gradually reshaping the fundamental laws that governed this region of space. Maya's shelter came into view as the aurora borealis began dancing across the sky in patterns that seemed almost purposeful. The electromagnetic phenomena had intensified since the entity's awakening, creating displays of light that pulsed with an alien rhythm. She couldn't shake the feeling that the aurora was some form of communication, a signal being broadcast to coordinates beyond Earth's solar system. Inside her shelter, Maya began uploading her sister's research files to a series of dead drops and emergency servers, hoping that someone would eventually piece together the truth. The encrypted data contained detailed analyses of the organism's behavior, potential countermeasures, and most critically, Sarah's theory about the entity's true purpose. The convergence wasn't an invasion in any conventional sense. It was an assimilation protocol, a gradual transformation of Earth's biosphere into something compatible with the entity's species. The process would take decades, perhaps centuries, but it was already irreversible. Humanity's only hope lay in adaptation rather than resistance. As Maya prepared for what might be her final transmission, she felt the entity's consciousness brush against her mind one last time. There was no malevolence in the contact, only an alien curiosity and something that might have been regret. The entity hadn't chosen this path any more than humanity had. It was simply following programming embedded in its very essence. The wind outside her shelter began to howl with increasing intensity, and Maya realized that the weather patterns around the crash site were becoming more violent and unpredictable. The entity's presence was creating a cascade of environmental changes that would eventually spread across the globe. She activated her emergency transmitter and began recording her final message, knowing that whoever eventually received it would inherit a world already in transition. The age of human dominance was ending, but perhaps something new could emerge from the convergence, a synthesis of two incompatible forms of life finding unexpected common ground. In the distance, shapes moved through the blowing snow, and Maya understood that her vigil in the wilderness was finally coming to an end.